Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Christian Truth or Apologetics interview. And today I have Christian Idealism with me. So why don't you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Hold on. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can hear you okay.
Okay. So, yeah, my name's Kyle Allender. Some of you may know me, some of you may not know me. Before I started my YouTube channel, I was mainly just kind of around the apologetics community. I wrote a few blogs for Inspiring Philosophy for some time. Um, but now I'm on my own. Well, I mean, if he needs help, I'll help him out. But now I do videos on my own and I do my own research and so forth. So my specialty is the philosophy of mind, and I hold to a view that many seem to not agree with, which is idealism. And I understand that most Christians are substance dualists, which is fine, but yeah, my view is somewhat different than most Christians, so I admit that. And so yeah.
Well, in the most, there's probably not a simplistic definition, but what do you think is the best way for people to understand what idealism is?
Well, I think the best way is you gotta really. So if you think in terms of monism, okay, where everything is just one substance, just one ontological substance, and that's it. Well, if you're a materialist, it's pretty easy to kind of think of materialism or physicalism in this way, where everything is just physical and mental events are just physical events, and that's it. Whereas idealism is like kind of reverse physicalism, where instead of everything being physical, everything is just mental, and it kind of reverses the ontology of physicalism and just turns all the physical into the mental. So you don't have, you don't have the hard problem of consciousness, you don't have the interaction problem, everything's just consciousness itself, and that's it. That's kind of the simplest way to understand the view.
So, how would you go about showing that things that appear to be physical to us really are mental substances? What's
Well, I actually did a video on this recently, and it's about the intuition, or at least people seem to think that idealism is counterintuitive because it's like, well, we see the material world. Like, why should I think that that material world is mental at all? And the problem is people assume that what we see is somehow outside of consciousness as an ontology. And all the idealist is doing is we're just extending the consciousness that we know of, and extending it beyond our perceptions of the world, and we are saying that the whole world is in consciousness per se. And there is an important distinction I make between consciousness proper and self-reflexive consciousness, which we can get into in a little bit. But basically, what you have to do is you have to realize that the outside world is everything that we experience is basically just mental phenomena, and there's no good reason to assume that there's this extra ontology that's outside consciousness. And so that's kind of how I deal with that issue. And the problem is you have to like invert your intuitions, right? And sometimes it could be difficult to do that. But I think the best way to understand it is we can reduce all of our experiences to mental phenomena, but it's much more difficult to reduce. Sorry, it's much more difficult to say that the mental is just an illusion of physical events, whereas it's much easier just to say that all of our experiences are just mental events. So
they're
it
not our mental events, so they would be sort of like gods.
right. Well, that's the thing, is you have to understand, because with God, you could say that God is like universal consciousness, but then the question is, does this universal consciousness have awareness of its own? And there is actually a big divide among idealists. Bernardo Kastrup takes a view that universal consciousness is not self-aware, whereas I would take the view that he is self-aware. So it just kind of depends on who you ask. But as a Christian, I would accept that universal consciousness is self-aware and has omniscience, omnipotence, so forth. I would just, that's
Well,
kind of my whole
are
thing.
any things that would appear to be outside of mind, at least for humans, I think you agree that none of that is dependent upon human mind or human
Well,
consciousness.
yeah, I agree. I would just say that it's still mental, but it's not dependent on human mentality. It's not dependent on human consciousness. It's just dependent on a much broader or universal consciousness that is outside of our personal psyches, or has have that's how Bernardo Kasha would describe it, where we are just personal psyches and we're just alters of universal consciousness, but then beyond us there's this objective reality that exists, and objective reality would basically be universal consciousness. So that's how you can explain things like, the cosmological history of the universe and so forth, um, and stuff like that. So that's how, at least that's how Bernardo Castro explains it, but whatever.
So, Epic Christ asks a question that reminded me of my question I wanted to ask you. What what mem- what is a mental property, and do each things have their own mental properties, or essentially is there no distinction between things with different properties? And since everything sort of comes from the same ontology, like in monism, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I actually have a video coming out tomorrow that makes the distinction between consciousness proper and self-reflexive consciousness. So just to kind of um, review, so consciousness proper is, under idealism, consciousness proper is the sole ontological primitive of a reality. And how I define it in the video that's coming out tomorrow is mental activity is conscious if there is something it feels like to have such mental activity in and of itself. Or if one wants to avoid using the word feel in that definition, philosophers of mind typically have defined consciousness as mental activity is conscious if and only if there is something, anything it is like to have such mental activity in and of itself. And so, like, you consider yourself conscious right now because there's something it is like to be you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be conscious, right?
Yeah,
But notice how this consciousness that you have doesn't require any knowledge. You can still have conscious, you can still experience something without necessarily knowing about it. Like,
true.
one example would be like you're breathing right now. Like, you were breathing regardless of whether or not you were aware of your breathing, but you still breathing. You still, things still go on in your mind that you're not necessarily fully aware of, but yet they still go on. And so that would be experience itself. Whereas when it comes to our awareness, when it comes to our knowledge of conscious experience, that would be what I call self-reflexive consciousness, which is the conscious knowledge of the experience, which comes in addition to the experience itself. So in other words, how I like to say it in the video is self-reflection is the consciousness that we have knowledge of and is the source of our language and the source of, I would say the source of our free will and so forth. That's why I make that important distinction, so that with this distinction I could actually explain that anything that we consider to be unconscious or non-mental is really just consciousness that's outside our knowledge of it, that's outside of our awareness. So that's kind of that's how, as an idealist, I would explain why it seems like that everything outside of my direct awareness, it seems like it's unconscious, but really it's consciousness, but it's consciousness that's outside my awareness, if you understand what I'm saying. You kind of understand
So,
what I'm saying?
yeah,
Sorry.
maybe this question may put my status of where I am understanding what you're saying. So, a rock, when we observe a rock, obviously it's not conscious. So, would you say that rock is really a thing there, or it's sort of
Yeah, well,
God's consciousness
it
sort of
w-
makes an
it would
illusion?
just be, well, here's the thing with inanimate objects like rocks, chairs, buildings, etc. Those things are not really conscious, or they're not alters. Okay, so an alter would be this knowledge of experience that and we're all alters. Like every human being, every living thing on this planet, everything that has awareness is an alter of universal consciousness. But when it comes to these other objects like trees and, I mean, I don't know if plants may be conscious, but when it comes to, like, for example, rocks or chairs, I would just say that those are just objects or mental objects that are the so that what makes them as universal consciousness. Like they're kind of like the thoughts of universal consciousness, but they're not, since they're not an alter, then they don't have knowledge of experience at all. So that's kind of how I would distinguish between an alter and something that's like a rock or a tree or something like that. So, but yeah,
So,
that's
so are you saying like a rock would have alter states of consciousness, or
no, no,
don't?
no. I'm saying it wouldn't because it doesn't have the knowledge of conscious experience, so it wouldn't be aware. So it wouldn't really. It would just be like a mental object. Like, you know how you think of physical objects that are outside consciousness. Well,
Yeah,
technically, the rock, under idealism, the rock is not outside consciousness. It's outside of our consciousness. It's outside of our awareness or alter, but it's not outside universal consciousness because the outside
yeah,
world that we experience is within
I get
universal
that.
consciousness. So,
Yeah, I get that. I guess my question was more towards if see if something has mental properties. At least for me, from us, I guess maybe we may. Let me just ask you what constitutes as a mental property? What makes something mental? I guess.
something is mental if it has the feeling of sentimental activity in and of itself. So it's just like properly basic, sort of like it has experiences basically. So like for example, I take the example of dreams where we dream every night, but we're not always aware of those dreams. But you wouldn't say that you're not conscious of those dreams. So that's how I kind of define consciousness. And mental activity would just, again, that would just be consciousness, the consciousness itself, or at least consciousness proper. So I would say that everything kind of experiences consciousness, but not everything has this knowledge of consciousness. That comes in addition to the experience, but it's not the experience itself. So that's how I kind of make that distinction.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding here, but it seems weird to give a rock mental properties if it's not experiencing anything.
Well, no, it doesn't have the knowledge, and it's not an alter either. The other thing is, it's rocks, like inanimate objects. They're not alters of universal consciousness like we are, so they wouldn't have the same sort of
Okay.
experiences that we have. They would just, again, they would just be like mental objects, just like everything else that's not an alter. So
So sort of like abstract objects a little bit.
I don't know about abstract, but
Okay.
I mean, I guess you could call it abstract, but I would say that, I mean, it depends on how you define abstract because some people would say that like numbers or something is abstract or whatever. But yeah, I need to do a video. I'm gonna do a video eventually on why any non-mental ontology is necessarily abstract to our knowledge. It's like an addition to anything that would be considered consciousness considered the consciousness only ontology. So yeah, but yeah, you do bring up an interesting point with regards to that. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
trying to think through this because it's quite an interesting take on reality. Obviously, a very unique one. Here's a question you may know better than me. How many would you know how many philosophers are idealists? I think it's sort of a small group. I could be wrong on
It's a
that.
minority. Yeah, I do. Here's the thing: is I do admit that yes, my view is a minority position within the philosophy of mind ac-
Well,
academia.
I think consensus when it comes to philosophy, if you make a conclusion based on consensus when it comes to philosophy, I think that's fallacious.
Well,
I
I
think,
know that.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think with scientific data that you can't experiment yourself, you sort of have to take the consensus view. Now, of course, the consensus can be wrong, but you sort of have to assume for the whole point. While philosophy, you can just come to conclusions based on statements you understand. And, just because, let's say, 99% of philosophers may be atheists, even though that is not the case. I don't know anyone who would
right.
argue that. That wouldn't mean that, therefore, the proposition they're defending is true. That's fallacious. You have to give good reasoning why and good, sound, and valid arguments.
Right. Hold on. Let me get Bernardo Castro's book real quick because he does talk about some of that kind of consensus. Hold on.
Okay, I'll look at some questions in the chat.
Okay. So one of the last chapters in his book is he talks about why academia is not just biased toward against idealism, but also biased against dualism and anything to do with, you know, if there's any ontology that is very, very prevalent in academia, it's obviously physicalism.
Yeah.
And the reason now he doesn't really get into specifics, but he seems to make the argument that the reason why the physicalist worldview is so popular is he calls it like a neurotic ego self-defense mechanism. I don't know what the hell that means, but basically he talks about how it's not based on reason. It's more based on being biased against anything spiritual or anything to do with the quote unquote supernatural, with at least within academia, and that's why there's such this bias toward supporting physicalism over these alternative ontologies like dualism or idealism. So that's why he wrote this book, because a lot of his material is peer reviewed, and so he's trying to bring back those alternative ontologies into academia so that they can kind of take down this sort of quote unquote consensus with regards to physicalism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, basically any position that affirms mind is actually a property.
Yeah, which yeah, if you go to pretty much a lot of the academia, it's a lot. It's very materialistic, but I think that's starting to change a little bit. But we'll see. I mean, it takes time with these sort of things.
Yeah, only time will tell. Um, so the brain is a physical representation of the mind, right? Because I think we've had this conversation before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but obviously, I think when we look at neurology and so on, you can't really test mental states. So, because obviously, we would say we think with our mind, and our mind contains mental states, at least from a substance dualist perspective. I would say
Yeah.
that. So,
Right.
would so would these sort of states arise from the brain? Would you sort of be like an idealist, property dualist, sort of?
Yeah. Well, I kind of the only here's the thing with it is I would say that our knowledge of conscious experience is a byproduct of the brain. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but if you really think about it, like the way that our brain works, it's like you can't make any free will decisions for one without your brain. You can't, there's a lot of things you can't be aware of really anything without your brain. And so I would actually say that when it comes to self-reflexive consciousness, which is our awareness of consciousness, that develops over time. Right. But when it comes to consciousness itself, you can't explain why there's experience in the first place. And that would be the hard problem. So because I'm an idealist, I don't have to face a hard problem. But then I also acknowledge the fact that it seems like our awareness sort of emerges from neurochemistry. Um, so yeah, I take that sort of view.
Now, if that's the case, it almost seems like maybe with the soul you may be able to get out of this sort of dilemma I propose. For the materialists, I would propose this problem for any sort of property dualist. Obviously, their mental states are going to arise from the rearrangement of molecules in a certain way. And it seems like to me, if that's the case, then all your beliefs are dependent upon molecules in a certain way. So it seems rationality affirming actual propositions as true or false is not dependent upon consciousness or free will, but rather your neurology. So
Right.
how
That would be, yeah, because that would be the problem if you're a materialist, which I'm not. I would say that the brain simply is the extrinsic appearance of consciousness. And so I wouldn't accept that there's this thing that's outside consciousness proper that's created in consciousness. I would just say that the brain is sort of the extrinsic appearance of experience, and then through that the brain is able to gain the knowledge of its own experience, because that's what we are. We're brains. I don't want to say brain of that, but we are brains, right? So that would be kind of my explanation. But
Well, I think I could just rearrange my argument to be like mental substance or mental properties arranged in a certain way give rise to your beliefs. I still see the same problem with this sort of.
not if you have a good old machine that can learn how to learn. That's the thing with neuroscience, is when it comes to our understanding of neurology, it seems like the brain is able to be aware or gain the knowledge of itself and make decisions and so forth. And when it comes to free will, there's a
Would you
whole
say
other.
that is you doing that? Your brain is you, sort of. And
Yes, but it would be like my personal psyche, but I wouldn't. It's not me, because the essential me is not my knowledge. It's just the experience, right? It's just my consciousness proper would be just my experience. And so I would say that the knowledge of that experience yes, it's also part of me, as well as my free will and my intentions and my desires, and stuff like that. That's all part of me. And then, if I damage my brain, I could damage certain aspects of myself. Like I can damage my personality or my knowledge or even my awareness, but I can't really damage my experiences. Like I could do severe damage to, your brain or anyone else's brain. And while it's true that they may lack the awareness or knowledge of their experiences, they could be having some crazy experiences that they just don't know about, or that no one else really knows about. So that's kind of my take on it. And unless you're going to say that I am my knowledge, or I'm, I guess we could get into like personhood and what it actually means to be the self, because it seems like that's kind of where this is heading.
well, I guess my whole point is that if if my thoughts basically, I'm thinking about, let's say, this laptop. I'm thinking about the laptop. That sort of argument for substance dualism. I would say, as a substance dualist, there is a soul working with the brain to, because I would agree that if you damage the brain, obviously there's going to be problems with logical thinking. So you have this substance that is a mental substance, but yet has free will with it, and it can evaluate these things, and it is not dependent on sort of a rearrangement of molecules. I'm not saying this is your position. I'm
Right.
just
Okay.
of materialism. So I guess I may still be confused with how the brain is the physical representation of the soul. Like, is your soul thinking? But I'm trying to find a way to word this, but I don't know if I'm.
It depends on how you define soul, because if we're talking about the essential aspect of ourselves, meaning the part that cannot be damaged through brain damage, that would just be conscious, like that would just be experience itself. So again, you can damage the knowledge of your experience. Like you can hit me super hard and I could lose all my memories, right? But that doesn't mean that, therefore, just because I don't remember my memories, that doesn't mean that therefore I lost all the experience of my memories. Like I still had those experiences, I just don't remember them, right? So
It
that's
would be
kind of
like
how.
extreme deja vu, sort of.
Right, exactly. So
So I may start going in a circle here with the same question. I don't know if this is the same question I asked before. Sort of, are my thought about something, is that sort of coming about from the rearrangement or however my brain is fit?
that would be your knowledge of conscious experience. That would be conscious. That I mean, yes, that would be conscious experience as well. But because you're aware of that thought, that would just be your knowledge of conscious experience. At least that's what I would say, and that's why we're able to, do a lot of neurochemistry and stuff like that.
Could you explain knowledge of conscious experience again?
That
Sorry
would be,
for
yeah.
thoughts.
So knowledge of conscious experience would be like, again, for example, if we're going back to your breathing, you're breathing right now, but you didn't have to be aware. You didn't, I just told you about the knowledge of breathing, right? Or for example, when you have a lucid dream, that would, lucid dreams are basically when you are fully aware of your experience of what's going on and you start using your free will to do what you want within that dream. Those are very rare. Doesn't happen very often, but it happens. But notice how dreams are largely non-self-reflexive. I mean, we're not always aware of those. Like sometimes you go to bed and you wake up and you don't remember your dream at all. Well, that doesn't mean that therefore you didn't have a dream. Like you still had a dream,
Yeah.
but you just don't remember your dreams. And so um, you still had those experiences. You're just not aware. You don't have the knowledge of those experiences. So that and again, like I said before, that would be the knowledge of conscious experience is the addition is an additional quality of experience, but it's not. It's again, you can damage the knowledge of conscious experience, but you can't damage consciousness proper. So,
So would my brain sort of be like embodiment of knowledge?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like our brains, I mean, I'm not a neurochemist, but I do know one, and he tells me that the brain is like this good old machine that can learn how to learn, and there's a lot of complicated stuff on it. But basically, like your brain is able to gain the knowledge of its experiences, and it's I would say that you can't really have free will without your brain. I mean, I guess you might be able to, but when it comes to your will, that's largely dependent upon your brain.
Well, as a substance dualist, I would say that if you don't have a body, and I agree sort of with I don't like dualism where you sort of speak of your brain as just a tool.
Right.
I think the body is made. I would sort of agree that the body is like a physical representation of the soul. Just obviously in a different ontological sense.
Right.
And the soul would inhabit that which it basically is, sort of physically speaking. But
right. I wouldn't disagree with that actually. The only thing I would disagree with would be the ontology, but again, it still works the same. So yeah, I agree with you that you kind of the mind or consciousness would kind of need the brain and the body in order to gain knowledge of its experiences and to be able to build itself and make decisions and so forth. So yeah, I totally agree with you there.
So I guess that's actually a good point to sort of talk about near death, or let's just say after death. So what is your view? What happens after the death of the body, I guess?
I think when you die, and they actually did a lot of now this wasn't on near death experiences, but they did do studies with regards to psychedelic drugs, which have to do with the expansion of consciousness and the expansion of awareness. So what they did is they found that when you take psychedelic drugs, it increases your conscious awareness, but it decreases your brain activity. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems very contradictory to physicalism because physicalism would make the prediction that if you increase conscious experience and awareness, then you would increase your neurochemistry in the brain. But they found the actual opposite, that when you increase
I know this study because IP was talking about it. So let me ask you this on your view that we sort of talked about before, but go ahead and finish first. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, so the problem is this would be in direct contradiction, or at least it would be a failed prediction of physicalism, because what that would mean is when you take psychedelic drugs, it decreases your brain activity, but then it increases your conscious awareness. So it would at least seem like our experiences are not produced by the brain, that there's something more there. And I would actually, and Bernardo Kastrup actually has a whole chapter on what his view on life after death. And what he says is when you take psychedelic drugs, that's kind of like that's kind of like the first stages of death. So when your brain finally starts to decrease its brain activity, then you get more and more aware, and you have really crazier and crazier experiences. And then once your brain completely dies, then I don't even know, I can't even describe what's going to happen under the idealist view, because I don't think no one's, I mean, yeah, people have experienced it, but no one has come back, and like, the closest we get is actually taking the psychedelic drugs. So that would be kind of my view, that when you die, then your awareness and your consciousness expand, and you experience like way more than you do in this life. And that continues on for, forever long. So
Now, it seemed like you're saying that we are sort of like brains, and that brain is a physical representation of the mind. And I think we would agree that mind is sort of what is conscious. Um, and
right.
so, wouldn't with these psychedelic drugs, wouldn't you expect more brain activity? Since your brain is your mind, and that is what's sort of conscious. Wouldn't you expect that to arise?
Yeah, but it's not that's the thing, is it's, yes, while it's true that the brain is the extrinsic appearance of the mind, when it comes to the brain producing the mind, that's not actually the case, is what I'm saying. And I would say, and I don't necessarily hold this view, but I know Kastrup does, and what he says is that when we're born, we're sort of like disassociated aspects of consciousness, and what happens at death is that disassociation breaks, and you become more aware of your experiences than you ever have in your entire life. And so that's kind of his view. I don't necessarily hold that, but
Well,
that would be, I guess, a good implication,
I can see that answering that objection, but
because that would help explain, like, near death experiences, and why they say that, oh, I was more aware of my experiences than before, and so that would explain it.
well, I watched a presentation by Gary Habermas on near-death experiences, and the stories he just talks about are amazing. Where people were literally brain and heart dead, and yet somehow they're experiencing the operation and so on. There's
Right, because that would be the early stages of death, basically. And so the question is, once you get beyond that point, once you actually die, you're not really dead. You're experiencing like I don't even know. I can't, again, I don't know what you would experience, but I guess you would just experience just full blown on consciousness. And that would, yeah. So you definitely don't die. I mean, if we're talking death in the materialist sense, like, no. Because here's the thing, with the crazy thing about idealism is, since idealism is the literal opposite of physicalism, then the implications of death would also be the exact opposite of physicalism. So under physicalism, when you die, that's it. Like, there's
yeah.
no afterlife. But then under idealism, it's the exact opposite, where there is an afterlife, and you would have these crazy experiences forever and ever, never. And so, yeah. That would be the implications under my view.
A substance dualist won't agree with your, or wouldn't disagree with your conclusion.
Right. So,
Try to remember what, going back to sort of the brain being the physical representation of the mind. So, would like the early stages of consciousness, would you need your body and brain basically to be able to have the experiences onward, sort of
for
after
what?
death?
Oh, well, not well, if you want to make I'd have to think about that more, but
Because, like, let's say a child dies, like maybe at one where they're barely even conscious. I mean, obviously they're conscious, obviously, but they're
no,
not.
they would just go back to because the thing with, I don't know how Bernard Kasha, but when he doesn't really explain what happens before birth, but I think his view is like, we had experiences before birth, but then we had a disassociation, so then we kind of lost like the majority of those experiences, but then we started gaining the knowledge of it afterwards, and that's what we're in now. And then when you die, so like if a child were to have these super experiences and then forget about them for a short time and then die again, then he would just get back those experiences that he had before.
So are you sort of saying that we were conscious at one point before we were physically born, sort of? Physically,
Yeah,
right,
we just don't remember. We just forgot what happened, basically. But again, well, the other thing, it's kind of hard. It would be kind of hard. I mean, I've thought about this before, but I don't think we really existed. I think we were just part of universal consciousness, and then we became disassociated aspects of it, and it became these alters within universal consciousness. And then slowly but surely we gain the knowledge of our own experiences. And then when we die, then we have both our awareness and our consciousness, and we can experience, whatever. But yeah, it's really difficult to speculate. It's really here's the thing, it's pretty easy to explain life after death, but it's really hard to explain life before birth.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the areas that I still need to work on and do research on, but yeah.
Well, we wouldn't like eternally exist, though, right? We would be
no.
There's emergence of space-time,
Yeah.
sort of. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Because obviously that would like have major issues with like contingency and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right. So, but yeah, I don't know. Here's the thing: is I'm gonna be honest with you. I honestly don't know exactly how what life was like before birth. I just don't know.
Just like we don't know what's going. Well, we
don't know what was going on from our perspective.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think we just forgot. That's kind of my idea, but I don't know. So.
Yeah, the substance dualists will say that once you're conceived, you're born. Sort of. But we've talked about 40 minutes of idealism, so let's move on to free will since you have a pretty good series on that. So, how would you define free will? And I guess you could relate it to idealism, how it sort of relates to that.
Well, free will is basically just you're able to make decisions without being predetermined, and there are certain free will actions that are more free than others. So, like, for example, if I go to McDonald's and I order, if I make, I'm going to order a Big Mac, but then I don't want this or that on it, that's not as important as like a moral decision, like whether or not I'm going to, like, for example, if I were diagnosed with diabetes, then I would have to make the moral decision of whether or not I'm going to keep on eating unhealthy.
Well, I see under the position where you do your desire, sort of what the compatibilist would argue. I think that libertarian free will still exists with that, because that would just limit your options, and you could just fulfill that desire with different options.
Right. No, I agree, and I don't necessarily hold this model, but there is a model of free will. It's Peter Tycey's model, and what he says that there has to be a certain criteria that has to be met in order for free will to take place, and that criteria builds up over someone's life. So, like, if you make certain decisions, and that's going to affect future decisions and so forth. But that's his model, and he kind of uses brain chemistry to kind of explain how it works. But yeah, something like his model would actually avoid a lot of the Straussian arguments against free will, which I didn't get into in my series. But what that basically argues is, like, the argument is that since we have reasons for choosing things, and therefore we don't have free will, which is kind of stupid once you take someone like Peter Tycey's model. But
yeah, because basically that's the dilemma where, look, if you have a reason, it's deterministic, but if you have no reason, it's just random and arbitrary.
Yeah, well, the thing with Peter Tycey's model is that avoids the whole issue, because free will would just be the criteria that has to be met that build up over the life of the agent. So, but yeah, there are different models. And when it comes to neuroscience, there's a lot of controversy with regards to, I guess the debate now is whether or not compatibilism is true. Because when it comes to like free will skepticism, within academia, it's pretty much mostly dead. And the people that do use the same arguments are the same Leibniz type debunked arguments that people like, rationality rules, like his video on free will was absolutely terrible because he used an argument that's been refuted like since 2015. So, I mean, I don't know exactly how free will works in the brain, but I think eventually we'll be able to explain it pretty well.
Well, is there a part of the brain that would be making free will choices?
No, it's more complicated than that, but there are models, but I don't know if any of them are, they're just models. I don't know if any of them are actually reality, like the actual correct model. So.
See, I guess why I don't hold to your view of the brain would be like, while they're doing neurology tests, like the one experiments where they stimulate the part of your hand or your brain, and then your hand goes up. You're conscious of that happening, but at the same time, since I don't hold that your brain sort of is your consciousness, I don't know. I may be still misunderstanding you. That, oh look, I just raised my arm. There's sort of a distinction between the two, if you get what I'm saying.
What do you mean, like a distinction between me raising my arm and me having the experience of? Because you would still experience that. You just wouldn't be self-aware of it. Is that what you're trying to get at? Or
so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I forget the experiment on the top of my head. Basically, if you were just your brain, sort of, and then your mental states arise from your brain states.
No, I wouldn't say. I would just say that our knowledge of our mental states. I wouldn't say that our mental states arise from our brain states. Yeah. I would say they're their mental states are certainly highly correlated, and I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with me there because you're a dualist. But yeah, I don't say that our mental states arises from our brain.
Good.
I just say that our knowledge arises from our brain. There's a clear distinction. So,
real quick, could you make the distinction so I can finally understand this?
Between self-reflexive consciousness and
the brain having a knowledge of mental states.
Okay, so the brain would basically it would be like this Google machine where it can learn how to learn, and it has experiences and it knows about those experiences, but the experiences itself are more fundamental to reality. So it's not that the brain is producing these experiences, but rather the brain kind of is aware of these experiences all the time. And then that would, of course, within the brain, you would have things like free will, our desires, stuff like that. Even our dreams. Well, I wouldn't say that dreams are. I would say that the awareness of our dreams are certainly produced by the brain, but the dream itself, the experience is, again, same situation. It would just be correlated with the brain. It's not caused by the brain. So
I think I would agree with that. I'd probably have to as a substance dualist. So is your brain your thinker, or because there's a comment here that I think helps lead me to my next question. So whenever I have, sorry if I keep like repeating myself. This is fairly.
It's okay.
Hard to understand. So like when I'm having these conscious experiences, and I'm like literally aware, is that your self-reflective consciousness?
Your awareness, yes, but your experiences, no. Your experiences are just consciousness proper. Your consciousness proper would be the ontological primitive of reality, and then your awareness that would come in addition to that experience.
So like would conscious self-reflection, I probably rearranged that the wrong way there, where I'm basically saying, look, I'm aware. Is that in the brain, or is there sort of a mind interacting with the brain? Is that malformed question for you?
It really depends on what you mean by brain, because as an idealist, the brain would be the same ontological substance as the mind that it's interacting with. So I guess the best way I could explain it is the brain is like the mold for the mind in order for it to experience and have awareness. Again, awareness is knowledge of its experiences.
Okay.
So that's the best way I could put it into simple words. But yeah.
I probably wouldn't disagree with that.
It's very the thing is it's very close to as dual aspect idealism, which I don't have any objections to, but I don't know if IP would hold to the view that awareness is produced by the brain. Um, I don't know. I haven't asked him about that, but whatever.
Were you saying awareness is produced by the brain?
Yeah, and what I mean by awareness is our knowledge of conscious experience. I'm not talking when I mean awareness, I'm not talking about consciousness itself. So
Okay, that makes so much more sense now because when you kept saying awareness, I was thinking like your conscious mind states of like the experience itself almost, and then like
no. That's why I make a distinction between consciousness and awareness. Most people don't try not to do that, but I do because I think there's an important distinction there. But yeah.
I would say that my knowledge of awareness is not from the brain, for me at least. I would say that we've talked about that for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
We went off of free will. So were you saying that you don't know how free will, because sort of free will really works with awareness, knowledge of our conscious experiences. That seems to really work with, you know, yeah, free will definitely works with the awareness of conscious experiences because almost every free will choice is in that arena of those categories. I think.
No, I agree. That's why I say that free will is sort of a product of the brain. I just don't know exactly how it works. That's all I'm saying. But yeah.
Okay, I would disagree then. Um, let's see here. I shared your one video on Leibniz experiments, and the experiments were apparently 10 seconds before you make a decision. Your uh, brain, what is it called?
Your readiness potential.
Yes, your readiness potential.
Yeah,
Makes the
that's
decision for you 10 seconds beforehand. Do you like agree with those experiments and say, well, during deliberations, there's no real readiness potential going on?
yeah, and that's what the evidence seems to show that when it comes to like the more awareness aspect of making decisions, that there is no readiness potential that exists, and that seems to be what the evidence shows. So
Yeah, because I think when you just ask someone to push a button, they don't really care, and they're not like consciously. Well, they're obviously conscious of it, but they're not going into self-reflective.
right, they're not aware of it. Right, they're not really thinking about it deeply. So yeah,
Yeah, but I sort of think that from my studies of the experiments, it still seems like I won't even agree with their conclusions because I think it's sort of the correlation doesn't mean causation fallacy there. But so let's talk about Molinism. What did you think of my mini debate with Trent, Dr. Trent?
I don't.
Oh, good.
I don't know, because I really had to think about his main objection with regards to Molinism, and he seems to be arguing against not divine providence, but meticulous providence. He
Yeah,
seems,
I
which,
don't know any Molinists who would hold to that.
yeah, and I think the issue is he thinks that Molinists hold to meticulous providence, which you don't necessarily have to hold to meticulous providence. So yeah, I mean,
That to me would be like if a Molinist would hold to meticulous providence, they would be like a soft Calvinist.
Right. But which again, I think his objection would still apply to that, but I don't think it applies to all of Molinism. And
Well, and then because I told him it doesn't really seem like you get out of this problem, because before God creates anything or emerges anything from consciousness or
yeah,
whatever,
right,
universal consciousness, he's still going to know. If you truly have a free choice, he still knows what you're going to do. So it still plays out the way that he wants to, the way it's going to play out through his knowledge, sort of. And he tried getting aware of that well, God is present throughout all moments, and therefore that's sort of how he knows. And before God creates, he doesn't know. Which
right. Well, the thing with meticulous providence is it's not just that God knows, but he caused it, which is the problem. So I
yeah,
think that's what Trent was trying to get at, is if God's causing these things, then you run into the problem of evil. Because if God's causing evil, and if we live in a world that God wanted, which is a world of evil, then you're going to run into that issue. And so I think the best way you can, deal with it is just don't accept meticulous providence, and there's no problems. So
yeah,
that's what I would say. So
because he seemed to go, well, look, God sort of has a filing folder of all possible worlds, and he chooses this one. He knows what's going to come about it, but obviously he doesn't want. Obviously, I don't think he wants evil to happen. I personally think God has the freedom to create. I think he has sort of boundaries, of course, but within those boundaries, like we sort of talked about
well, those are
before,
logical boundaries, and
yeah, exactly. Not
like
because I think God could sort of create a universe in which there's no humans and
right,
still sort of be considered good. I just think the whole thing is a loving gift from God in the first place.
right,
And maybe one would argue, well, wouldn't that just be a logical boundary since God is all loving? Again, it would just be sort of in that you do your greatest desire, but you still have options for that. But yeah, I just find if you hold that God is omniscient and could create otherwise, or sort of has freedom to create these possible worlds, then
right. And I think
not every moment is necessary, aka the contingency argument you use. You have to accept mental knowledge. You don't have to be like a hardcore Molinist, but you have to at least accept that basic principle.
no, right. And I would say that it's more valuable for God to create a universe than for God to not create anything at all. So that's why that's why he created this universe. So at least that would be my kind of assessment. But because God's not gonna create a universe with no free will, because then what would be the point? He doesn't want robots. He wants free will creatures to do the good without being forced to do it. And so he's gonna make a world of free creatures. Those free creatures are gonna rebel against him, and at the same time, it's like, now people complain, oh well, why doesn't God stop every evil action? Well, if God stopped every evil action, people are never gonna see what the rebellion causes in the first place. So it would defeat the whole purpose. God wants to sanctify people. He doesn't want to baby them. So yeah, I don't know. We could do a whole other podcast on the problem of evil, but I accept Clay Jones's theodicy, which has to do with that God allows evil because he wants us to see the consequences of sin, and that once we see those consequences, then we can hopefully turn back to him and be sanctified.
Yeah, it just all falls under the category of morally sufficient reasons.
Right. So
So Brendan Peterson asks, can you ask Kyle what he thinks about eclectic media who claims he has debunked UIP and ROTS?
Galactic. Oh, he's talking about Dorpaton. Okay. Yeah, I don't want to. Well, I'm going to say it right now, but I have a video response to him that's coming out next week with regards to his video on why the mind is a property, and I'm basically I already have the video ready. I just haven't published it yet. But
Did you say why mind is a property or isn't?
no, because he made a video on why the mind
Okay,
is a property, and I'm making a video response to his arguments. So
I thought he made a video where he said mind isn't a property. Why mind isn't a property?
no, he said he made a video on why mind is a property. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone really takes him seriously that much.
Well,
His arguments are pretty bad.
He's a mythicist from last I could tell when he commented on, I think, the IP versus David Jitt at Fitzgerald debate. And he was making the sort of mythicist arguments. It it was one of my history videos, I think, but he was just making horrible arguments. That and against the Kalam. Like, I know you don't hold to Kalam because you're a B theorist, but you would agree that his objections to it were pretty bad.
Yeah, and it's very clear that he hasn't read any of the literature with regards to Jesus, the historical Jesus, or philosophy of mind for that matter, which the majority of his videos are about. So yeah, I don't want to block the dude, but like, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure, so whatever. There's only so much you can do with people.
I agree. I've gotten to the point where I just sort of ignore it because it's just like it's going to be the same possible world.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you're interested?
We can talk about anything. I don't care. We can go outside philosophy of mind. We could talk about the problem of evil. We could talk about heaven or hell. I don't care. As long as I know somewhat about it. Like if we start talking about politics, certain like immigration, it's like I don't want to talk about that. But like we can stick within philosophy of religion, I suppose. If you want to talk about any of that stuff.
I guess for the next 5 minutes, you could ask me some questions if you have any, and then maybe for like another 5, take audience questions, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, just take audience questions. So,
okay, so you have no questions for me?
No.
Oh, I guess I'm not that interesting. Okay, then 10 minutes of a Q&A then.
Yeah, go ahead.
There were actually some, so I'll just go to the top. Here, I know there's one about the incarnation on idealism.
Hold on, I'll be right back. I'll be back in like 30 seconds, but just get your questions ready.
Yeah. Am I going to debate Apologia? I didn't think he challenged me to a debate, but I probably won't have time because I still haven't done the response to the ontological argument, which I really want to do. So that probably won't be happening. I don't have time for like these formal debates. I have time for like informal discussions.
All right, I'm back.
Cool.
I'm doing research right now on New Testament reliability, and I'm trying to collect most of the arguments from YouTube atheists like Palegia, Godless Engineer, and I'm going to try to steelman their arguments, and then when I do my series, I'm going to use their arguments. Again, I'm not going to mention them, but I'm going to use the strongest form of their arguments and then kind of address those arguments. So yeah. Like I can give you one example. So Palegia, he made a recent video in response to William Lane Craig, not about the resurrection, but about why the Gospels are not independent sources. And most of the assumption behind his argument was redactal criticism, which is not a good assumption to make. There's a lot of problems with it. And I actually have a book called The Jesus Legend that kind of refutes those sort of assumptions behind. Because the thing with a lot of these arguments, especially on the internet, with regards to New Testament reliability, is that they all rely on Boltzmann assumptions with regards to New Testament reliability. And once you take down those Boltzmann assumptions, then pretty much all of their arguments fall apart. And so I'm doing a lot of research on that. And I'm going to kind of outline the main arguments, go into why those arguments make those assumptions, and then refute those assumptions. So that'll be pretty interesting. But yeah, I'm going to look into that more.
Yeah, history and like just natural theology are more of my strong suits. I'm very interested in philosophy of mind. Obviously, I think I could read a lot more on both idealism and substantialism. But I guess the biggest reason for why I'm a substantialist is because I also think the Bible supports. I have like a 12 or 13 page paper on my website about that. But there is a question about the incarnation. Let's see if I can find it here again. Did I miss it? Oh, okay. So basically, was the experience a Roman centurion had? That's not it. So okay, I guess. What about those people who can't feel mental states, like those who are blind or those who can't use their sensory mental states? Is everything, but why can't some people acknowledge?
Sorry, what was the question about?
I don't know. Let's not move on to a different one. So, did Christ really physically die on the cross, or was that just a mental state of a Roman centurion?
No. I think that's assuming subjective idealism, which I think is wrong. I think Jesus, died on a cross, but I think the problem is you're assuming that the word physical has to mean this substance outside of the ontology of consciousness, which I think is a bad assumption to make. And I honestly don't think the biblical writers were using those sort of metaphysical terms like physical as in beyond consciousness or stuff like that. So that would be kind of my response to that question.
I would definitely disagree because of how the Greeks obviously were substance dualists. I mean, I don't know if you would dispute that, but they definitely talked that way. And I think through Greek Hellenization, it was definitely an idea going around that time. So, but we don't have to discuss that, I guess.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between solipsism and idealism?
Solipsism is a view that only your mind exists, whereas idealism is the view that not only does your mind exist, there are also multiple other minds outside of you, and then within that, there's this universal consciousness that holds all minds into its mentation.
Yeah, I wouldn't say idealism is solipsism.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, solipsism is sort of a form of idealism, but it's like a skeptical form of idealism where you think that only you exist and that's it. But yeah, it's very odd. But yeah, idealism and solipsism are not the same. So.
Unapologetic apologist. What have I missed a lot? Let's see here. Oh, okay. Are there any good books on idealism?
Yeah, there's Bernardo Kastrup's book, The Idea of the World. There are some things I don't agree with him on. Like, I think his view of the universal consciousness itself is wrong. He takes the view that universal consciousness lacks awareness, whereas I take the view that it does have awareness and that it can make decisions and that it, has omniscience, omnipotence, and so forth. And then there's also More Than Matter by Keith Ward. There's a few books, not on idealism, but on just general arguing that consciousness is more than just the brain, which is arguments pertaining to quantum mechanics. But yeah, I think the best one right now would be The Idea of the World by Bernardo Kastrup. That's the best one I would highly recommend that anyone interested in Idealism should definitely read. So
So aren't colors mental states?
yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're like Steve McRae or other people who say colors don't exist.
Which, I mean, in a certain extent they don't, but I think they do to a certain degree.
Well,
So
they're properties of things.
yeah,
So,
but the problem is you're assuming that there's this thing outside of your mental experiences that are causing. Well, you're assuming that what's causing your mental experiences is non-mental. That's the problem, and there's no way for you to actually confirm that to be the case. So I'm gonna do a video on that eventually, but yeah.
are you saying it's not possible?
No. I'm saying you're making the assumption. I'm not saying it's not I'm just saying that you're making an assumption. It's just an explanatory body. It's not like an empirical fact that
Yeah.
there's this non-mental reality outside consciousness. So
Well, yeah. Then you have to define consciousness, and then there's obviously a world outside my consciousness, but universal consciousness is
right,
part of.
that's why whenever I say that there's no world outside of consciousness, what I typically mean is there's no world outside the ontology of consciousness. And
Sure.
that
So,
doesn't
well, even saying it's a property of a thing, it's still a property of that certain mental substance.
right, right, exactly.
Um, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're going to deny mental states, I mean, you might as well just deny your knowledge of the world at
Yeah,
that point.
that's basically
So,
Descartes in a nutshell. Um. Okay, the last question will be my question. Do you think Christian truth should be spread through apologetics?
no, I'm joking, yes.
At first, I thought you were serious. I was like, "What?" Cool. Then, there we agree. I mean, there's honestly not too much we disagree on. Um, yeah. So I guess the biggest difference between you and I would be that everything is part of the same mental substance. I I don't like using, like, if I was an idealist, I don't think I would use the word ontology. I would sort of use the word sort of substance and or metaphysics. Like, your metaphysics is that everything is sort of mental, but at the same time it has distinctions and properties, and it would have that sort of ontology. Well, I would say there's my metaphysics would be that there's sort of a physical world, and then the mental.
Right, because there are different qualities of experience. Like, for example, knowledge would be a quality of experience that would come in addition to experience itself. So, yeah.
And an understanding, according to Aristotle and basically philosophy level wisdom, would be the almost highest experience, which I think when you come to understand Christ and so on, that's probably the highest form of a conscious experience, maybe. But
Yeah.
what I there is one more question. What I don't think you would say there's a biblical justification for idealism, because I think you would probably say that they weren't even thinking about the
Yeah, they
sort of
weren't.
things.
I wouldn't. I would just say that they weren't really thinking in those terms in the way that we 21st century people would be thinking about metaphysics. So they could have their own like you could have Thomistic metaphysics, maybe, but I honestly don't know. So yeah,
Okay,
I would take
last.
more of a Michael Heiser approach where they're just talking within their culture, what they knew during their time. They're not really talking about the
I
nature of
would agree.
reality.
I would agree.
So
Um, I definitely think Greek culture, though, I could probably admit that the Old Testament doesn't have as much on substantialism, but I think the New Testament's just filled with it, or at least this sort of soul body ontology. But anyway, uh, this question is up to you to answer. How do you reconcile free will on B theory, basically?
well, I don't hold to the block time model of the universe. I'm
Okay.
doing a whole yeah. So I'm doing I'm gonna do a series on philosophy of time eventually, and what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna basically be defending an idealist version of presentism.
Yeah,
So
don't spoil any more.
I'm not, yeah. It'll
Uh,
be yeah, but we'll see what happens.
cool. Anything you want to plug? I already have the link to your channel in the description, but if there's anything else you want to plug, then now's your time to do this. So, or
No, unless anyone else has questions. Eventually I'm gonna do more. My next series is gonna be refuting objections to idealism, and then oh wait, hold on, give me one moment.
let's see if there's anything addressed to me.
Okay, I'm back. I gotta leave in 20 minutes, but
Yeah. Well, I have to be done as well. So, what's the best way people can contact you if they have questions for you? I guess.
you can do Facebook, um, or you can just email me. Hold on, because I don't think I haven't put my email on my. You know what? After this, I'll put my email on my about on my YouTube page. I'll put in my about section. I'll put my email for this account. I do have a private account. Don't email me there. Just email me on this account if you want to ask questions or whatever. I should fairly respond pretty fast. And if there's a question that I did a video on, or at least that a video addresses, then I'll just link them to that video. I'm pretty open to questions as long as it's within my knowledge of what I know. Like if you ask me about certain things in physics, I'm probably not going to know. But if you ask me like things about quantum mechanics, I might be able to answer some questions. But yeah, it just kind of depends on the subject. And yeah. But my next series is going to be on philosophy of time, and then eventually I'm going to do a series on epistemology, then a series on quantum idealism, then a series on miracles, New Testament reliability, and then my big series is going to be on the resurrection.
Cool. I like your motivation there on the focus of the resurrection.
Yeah, that series is going to be really like I'm going to try to make the best case possible for the resurrection. Just like kind of like I did for free will, I'm going to kind of do the same thing with the resurrection and just deal with the main objections. And I'm really hoping that because when I do my New Testament reliability series, I'm going to be addressing kind of those Boltzmannian assumptions, and then I'm going to use those kind of responses in my resurrection series so that I can deal with objections pertaining to like the empty tomb and so forth. But I have to do a lot more research before I actually do those series, but I'm hoping I can get there eventually. So we'll see what happens.
I can help you with the martyrdom of the apostles because I've done quite some research into there.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on.
Yep.
And people will go subscribe to Christian Idealism. He also has some stuff on biblical slavery. Probably not something you expect on an idealist page.
But it is a Christian page too, so I don't just focus on philosophy of mind. I also do Christian stuff, Christian apologetics in general as well. So it's not just exclusive to philosophy of mind. So yeah, that's why it's called Christian Idealism. So.
Yep. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support the channel, you have there's some links in the description. And Christian truth needs to be spread. Christian truth needs to be spread through apologetics. It's a tongue twister, and sometimes it twists my tongue, but you get the point. Thank you for watching.